Evidence Log 11, The Mandylion. My name is Anna Keller. I am an investigative forensic journalist. I follow evidence. And the evidence in this log begins in a city that no longer exists by the name I need to use. Edessa, present-day Sanliurfa in southeastern Turkey. A city ancient enough to have been old when Abraham walked its streets. A city that sits, in the tradition of the Shroud of Turin, at the intersection of the most compelling and the most contested thread in the entire provenance argument. I want to tell you about the Mandylion, and I want to tell you why, as a journalist who has spent the better part of 2 years following this chain of evidence, I find it both the most fascinating and the most frustrating piece of the record. The Mandylion is described in early Christian tradition as an image of Christ not made by human hands. The Greek term is a kieropoieton, an image that appeared on cloth without the intervention of an artist. The tradition places this cloth in Edessa from the 1st century AD, where it was kept, venerated, and eventually transferred to Constantinople in 944 AD after the city fell to Byzantine forces. The historical record of that transfer is specific. Gregory the Archdeacon of the Hagia Sophia delivered a sermon in the imperial palace of Constantinople on the 16th of August 944, describing the arrival of the cloth. That date is documented. That event is documented. What is contested is whether the cloth Gregory described was the Shroud of Turin. Here is what the argument looks like when it is made carefully. If the Mandylion was the shroud, folded to show only the face, it would explain why early descriptions refer only to a face. It would explain why the Byzantine depictions of Christ from the 7th century onward show a face that corresponds in more than 100 specific anatomical points to the face on the shroud. It would place the cloth in a documented institutional chain from the 1st century through the 10th, when it arrived in Constantinople, through 1204, when the cloth disappeared during the Fourth Crusade. And it would explain how it reappeared in 1353 at Lire in France in the hands of Geoffroy de Charny. That is a chain. It has gaps, but it is a chain. Here is what the argument looks like when it is made honestly. The Mandylion identification is contested by serious scholars who have examined the same sources and reached different conclusions. The descriptions of the Edessa image do not all agree with each other. Some describe only a face, some describe a full body, some describe properties consistent with the shroud, some do not. The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive, and a forensic journalist who tells you otherwise is not being straight with you. What I find more interesting than the identification argument is what the WAXS study said about the Edessa path specifically. The 2022 University of Padua study modeled 4 historical paths the shroud might have traveled, using the actual monthly temperatures and humidity levels of each city along each route. The Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople path produced a maximum theoretical aging value of 0.519. The measured value for the shroud was 0.60. The Edessa path alone does not fully account for the aging. But here is where it gets interesting. The same study noted that a composite path, Jerusalem to Memphis to Edessa to Constantinople, would produce aging fully compatible with the measured value. Some centuries in the heat of Egypt before the cloth arrived in Edessa would close the gap. The Mandylion tradition and the physical aging evidence are not mutually exclusive. They may simply be incomplete descriptions of a longer journey. I have been thinking about that journey for 2 years, about what it means to follow an object across 2,000 years of history, through fires and conquests and silences and reappearances, about the people who carried it, who kept it, who refused to let it disappear even when disappearing would have been safer. In the novel I am writing, Chain of Custody, the first volume of the Keller Corpus, my character Anna Keller arrives at this investigation as a skeptic. She has built a career dismantling religious fraud. She believes in chains of custody and nothing else. She does not go to Turin looking for a miracle. She goes looking for a gap in the institutional record. What she finds is more complicated than faith or fraud. She finds an object generating institutional anxiety for 2,000 years. She finds Henri in the 1898 Turin darkroom, watching a face emerge. She finds Harmon in the Cambridge laboratory, writing a note in the margin of a suppressed document that will not be found for 30 years. She finds the chain. The Edessa thread is one of the chains I am following in the research that underlies these novels. Not because the Mandylion identification is proven, it is not, but because the institutional behavior around it is exactly the kind of behavior that a forensic journalist recognizes. The studied ambiguity, the careful management of what gets documented and what gets lost. Something was in Edessa, something generated enough institutional reverence that the Byzantine emperor sent an army to retrieve it in 944 AD. Something disappeared from Constantinople in 1204, and it reappeared in France in 1353 in the possession of a French knight whose family connections to the Crusades remain to this day only partially explained. That something may be the cloth now kept in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. The physical evidence across 10 logs is consistent with a 2,000-year-old first-century textile. The chain does not close, not yet, but it is longer than the medieval forgery hypothesis can accommodate, and it runs through a city that no longer exists by the name the tradition uses. I am following it. The Keller Corpus, chain of custody, ghost record, and the volumes that follow is the fiction that lives alongside this research. Anna follows the chain in the novels. I follow it here. Parallel chains. I have spent my life following leads, and I believe the physical record of this cloth is the most compelling investigative story of our time. I believe it is authentic. The investigation continues in both directions. If you are here for the research, the full record is at search-anna-keller.sub-stack.com. If you are here for the fiction, chain of custody is the place to begin. The search continues. Chain of custody, intact to this point. Pay attention to what does not fit.